You have been told your whole life that raw chicken is the most dangerous thing in your kitchen. And yes, it can make you seriously sick. But the foods that can actually kill you in a single sitting are not meats at all. They are plants, fruits, beans, and roots that billions of people eat every single week, separated from being potentially lethal by just one step of preparation. This is every raw food ranked by how dangerous it actually is, starting with the one everyone fears the most and ending with the one almost nobody sees coming. Raw eggs might be the single most feared raw food in the Western world. Parents warn their children not to lick the cookie dough bowl. Restaurant menus carry disclaimers. Entire recipes have been rewritten to avoid them. But the actual numbers tell a very different story. According to research published in the International Journal of Food Microbiology, roughly 1 in every 20,000 eggs produced in the United States is internally contaminated with Salmonella enteritidis. That means if you cracked a raw egg into your breakfast every morning, statistically you would encounter a contaminated one about once every 55 years. The bacteria can be deposited inside the egg before the shell even forms, so washing the outside does nothing. Cooking to 71 degrees Celsius kills the salmonella completely, and pasteurized shell eggs eliminate the risk for raw applications like Caesar dressing or homemade mayonnaise. In Japan, the dish tamago kake gohan, a bowl of hot rice with a raw egg cracked directly over it, is eaten by millions of people daily. Their egg safety standards are strict enough that the raw egg is not considered a gamble. It is considered breakfast. For healthy adults, the fear of raw eggs is dramatically overblown, but the actual danger, hiding in that same bowl of cookie dough, is not the egg at all. It is something sitting right next to it on the kitchen counter. Flour sits in nearly every pantry on the planet, and almost nobody thinks of it as a raw food, but it is. Wheat is harvested from the field, milled into powder, and packaged. It has never been pasteurized or treated with heat to kill bacteria. And that field is full of wildlife. Birds, rodents, and deer pass through the crops and leave behind bacteria, including Shiga toxin-producing E. coli. In 2016, the CDC traced an outbreak of E. coli infections across 24 states back to a single brand of all-purpose flour. 63 people were infected. Nearly 250 products were recalled off grocery store shelves, and the source was not some exotic ingredient. It was General Mills Gold Medal flour, one of the most common baking brands in America. Since then, the CDC has investigated flour-linked outbreaks in 2019, 2021, and 2023. The symptoms of steak infection begin about 3 to 4 days after exposure, starting with severe stomach cramps, often bloody diarrhea, and vomiting. In children, the infection can progress to hemolytic uremic syndrome, a condition that destroys red blood cells and leads to kidney failure. And here is the part that catches people off guard. Every time someone eats raw cookie dough, licks cake batter off a spatula, or lets their child play with homemade Play-Doh made from uncooked flour, the flour is the more likely source of illness than the raw egg ever was. Baking and cooking kill the bacteria completely. But until that heat is applied, a bag of flour is as raw as any vegetable pulled from the dirt. Flour becomes safe the moment it reaches the oven. But the next food on this list does not give you that option. Every potato in the world belongs to the nightshade family, the same botanical group that includes belladonna and tobacco, and potatoes produce their own natural pesticide to ward off insects. It is called solanine, a glycoalkaloid concentrated in the skin, the sprouts, and any part of the potato that has turned green. That green color is chlorophyll, which itself is harmless, but it signals that the potato has been exposed to light, and light exposure triggers solanine production. Solanine works by inhibiting an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase, which is the same mechanism used by certain nerve agents. At low doses, it causes nausea, vomiting, and stomach cramps. At higher doses, it starts affecting the nervous system. Toxic symptoms appear at roughly 2 to 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. For a child, that is a much lower threshold than most parents would expect. In 1979, 78 schoolboys in London fell ill after eating potatoes that had been stored improperly over the school holidays. 17 of them were hospitalized. And here is what makes green potatoes different from almost every other entry on this list. Cooking does not destroy solanine. It is heat stable. Boiling, baking, and frying do not break it down. The only real protection is prevention. Storing potatoes in a cool, dark cupboard and cutting away any green patches or sprouts before cooking. The good news is that bitterness usually acts as a built-in warning. A potato with dangerously high solanine levels tends to taste noticeably bitter, and the body's instinct is to stop eating before reaching a harmful dose. Bitterness is the body's first defense against solanine. But the next food on this list tastes sweet, looks golden, and gives absolutely no warning at all. Honey carries two completely separate dangers, and they have nothing to do with each other. The first is infant botulism. About 10% of honey samples tested in the United States contain dormant spores of Clostridium botulinum, the bacterium that produces one of the most potent toxins known to science. In an adult, these spores pass through harmlessly. The mature gut microbiome outcompetes them before they can establish themselves. But in a baby under 12 months old, the gut is still developing, and those spores can germinate, colonize the intestine, and begin producing botulinum toxin inside the infant's body. The symptoms start with constipation, followed by a floppy and lethargic appearance, weak feeding, and in severe cases, respiratory failure. The United States sees roughly 100 cases of infant botulism every year, with around 20% linked directly to honey exposure. This is why pediatricians worldwide say the same thing. No honey before age 1. Ever. The second danger is something entirely different. In the mountains of eastern Turkey and along the Black Sea coast, bees feed on the nectar of wild rhododendron flowers, producing a dark reddish honey called deli bal, which translates to mad honey. It contains gray anotoxins, compounds that force open sodium channels in the heart and nervous system, causing dizziness, dangerously low blood pressure, slowed heart rate, and in serious cases, cardiac arrhythmia. This honey has been causing problems for a very long time. In 401 BC, the Greek historian Xenophon described an entire column of soldiers stumbling and collapsing after eating wild honeycomb during a military campaign in Anatolia. Centuries later, accounts suggest that forces under Mithridates left pots of mad honey in the path of advancing Roman troops as a deliberate weapon. More than one spoonful of the concentrated version can cause poisoning today. Two completely different mechanisms, one ancient, one modern, both hiding inside the same golden jar. Of everything on this list, raw kidney beans might be the single most surprising entry. According to the FDA's Bad Bug Book, eating as few as 4 or 5 improperly cooked red kidney beans can cause severe vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Not 4 or 5 handfuls, 4 or 5 individual beans. The culprit is a lectin called phytohemagglutinin, a protein that binds to the intestinal lining and causes intense inflammation. Raw red kidney beans contain between 20,000 and 70,000 hemagglutinating units of this lectin. Fully cooked kidney beans, boiled at 100 degrees Celsius for at least 10 minutes, contain between 200 and 400. That is a reduction of more than 99% from one simple step. But here is where it gets tricky. If kidney beans are cooked at a lower temperature, say in a slow cooker hovering around 75 degrees Celsius, the toxicity can actually increase compared to eating them raw. The lower heat partially breaks down the bean structure and releases more lectin, but never gets hot enough to destroy it. This has caught home cooks off guard for decades. Someone puts dry beans in a slow cooker in the morning, comes home expecting a safe pot of chili, and ends up violently ill within an hour of eating. The onset is fast, usually 1 to 3 hours, and recovery is also fast once the beans are out of the system. Red kidney beans have the highest lectin levels of any common bean, roughly 3 times more than white beans and 10 times more than broad beans. Canned kidney beans are completely safe because the canning process involves pressure cooking that destroys the lectin entirely. If you are finding this interesting, hit subscribe. I break down the stories behind everyday foods every week. When people think about dangerous raw foods, they usually think about raw meat first. And raw chicken is a serious concern. It is the single largest source of Campylobacter infections in the United States, a bacterium responsible for an estimated 1.5 million illnesses every year. Chicken is also the leading meat source of salmonella. Food safety guidelines set poultry at 74 degrees Celsius, the highest safe cooking temperature of any common meat. But frequency of illness is not the same thing as severity. And when it comes to severity, ground beef is the bigger concern. The bacterium E. coli 0157H7 produces Shiga toxin, which can trigger hemolytic uremic syndrome in 5 to 15% of those infected. HUS destroys red blood cells and is the leading cause of acute kidney failure in American children. In 1993, an outbreak traced to undercooked hamburger patties at Jack in the Box restaurants infected 732 people across 4 states. 4 children died. 178 others suffered permanent injuries, including kidney and brain damage. Ground beef is uniquely risky because the grinding process distributes bacteria from the outer surface throughout the interior, where a lower cooking temperature might not reach it. A whole steak can be safely eaten rare because bacteria live only on the seared outside. Ground beef does not have that margin. And pork, the meat that generations of parents insisted was the most dangerous of all? Modern commercial farming has nearly eliminated the parasite that earned pork its reputation. Trichinosis cases in the United States now average about 15 per year, and most come from wild game like bear, not from anything sold in a supermarket. Cooking solves the problem with every type of meat, but there is one animal protein that millions of people eat deliberately and enthusiastically without any cooking at all. A single oyster filters roughly 50 gallons of seawater every day, pulling in nutrients, plankton, and whatever else is suspended in the water column. That includes bacteria, viruses, and toxins, all of which concentrate inside the oyster's tissues at levels far higher than the surrounding water. When you eat a raw oyster on the half shell, you are swallowing everything that oyster has filtered. The most common risk from raw oysters is norovirus, the same stomach bug that rips through cruise ships and school cafeterias. But the truly dangerous bacterium is Vibrio vulnificus. According to the CDC, about 1 in 5 people infected with Vibrio vulnificus die, sometimes within a day or two of becoming ill. A study tracking cases in Florida over 11 years found that among people with liver disease who developed Vibrio septicemia from raw oysters, the fatality rate reached 67%. And here is what makes oysters different from almost every other food on this list. A contaminated oyster on a bed of crushed ice looks completely normal. It smells normal. It tastes normal. There is no way to tell the difference between a safe oyster and a dangerous one without laboratory testing. The old rule about only eating oysters in months containing the letter R was based on the idea that warm summer waters breed more Vibrio. But today, oysters are shipped from warm waters year-round, and climate change is pushing Vibrio bacteria into coastal waters that were once considered too cold. For healthy adults, the odds remain low. For anyone with liver disease, diabetes, or a weakened immune system, a raw oyster is one of the riskiest bites of food on the planet. Raw oysters are a luxury that carries a hidden cost. But the next food on this list is not a luxury at all. It is a lifeline for 500 million people. Cassava feeds roughly 500 million people around the world. It is the primary source of calories across large parts of sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, and in its raw form, it is one of the most dangerous staple foods on Earth. The cassava root contains cyanogenic glycosides, primarily a compound called linamarin. When the raw root is cut, chewed, or crushed, enzymes break the linamarin apart and release hydrogen cyanide. Bitter cassava varieties, the most widely cultivated because they resist pests better, contain the highest concentrations. The lethal dose of hydrogen cyanide for an adult is roughly 30 to 210 milligrams depending on body weight, and a large serving of improperly processed bitter cassava can deliver that. Acute poisoning causes rapid breathing, dizziness, confusion, and it can be fatal within hours. But the chronic form may be even more devastating. In regions where communities rely on cassava without adequate processing, long-term low-level cyanide exposure causes a condition called konzo, an irreversible spastic paralysis of the legs that primarily strikes children and women of childbearing age. Once it sets in, it does not improve. Outbreaks tend to spike during droughts and food crises when families are forced to eat cassava that has not been properly soaked, fermented, or sun-dried. The processing methods that make cassava safe, including soaking in water, drying under the sun, and fermenting over several days, have been practiced for centuries. They work because hydrogen cyanide is volatile and dissipates with time, water, and heat. When the preparation is done correctly, cassava flour and tapioca are perfectly safe staples. When it is rushed or skipped, cassava becomes a quiet catastrophe. But the final food on this list is dangerous, in the smallest possible dose. The almonds sitting in your kitchen cabinet are sweet almonds, and they are perfectly safe to eat raw. But their close relative, the bitter almond, is one of the most acutely toxic foods on this entire list. Bitter almonds contain a compound called amygdalin at concentrations up to 400 times higher than sweet almonds. When you chew a bitter almond, enzymes in your saliva and stomach break the amygdalin down and release hydrogen cyanide directly into the bloodstream. The effect is rapid. According to a study published in Isrin Toxicology, approximately 50 bitter almonds contain enough cyanide to kill an adult. For a young child, the lethal range drops to somewhere between 5 and 10 almonds. The taste is the main defense. Bitter almonds are intensely, unmistakably bitter, far more so than any sweet almond you have ever tasted, and the body's natural reaction is to stop eating after one or two. But the risk is real enough that several countries either regulate or entirely restrict the retail sale of raw bitter almonds. Boiling removes about 98% of the cyanide, microwaving removes roughly 87%, and baking removes about 79%. This is why bitter almond extract and Italian amaretti cookies are safe to eat. The processing drives off the danger. And it is the same reason amaretto liqueur, which traditionally used bitter almonds for flavor, does not poison anyone who drinks it. You will probably go your entire life without encountering a raw bitter almond, but if you ranked every raw food purely by how little it takes to kill, the bitter almond sits right at the top. Every food on this list is safe when prepared correctly. That is the thread running through all of it. Cooking kills bacteria, heat destroys lectins, soaking removes cyanide, and proper storage prevents solanine. The danger is almost never in the food itself. It is in the gap between raw and ready. And the more you understand what is happening inside the foods you eat every day, the harder it becomes to take any of it for granted. If you want to keep learning about the science behind everyday food, that video is on screen now.